months ago we had a change of committee, and one of our most senior committee members demitted office. And this, I think, is the first time she's been back at a meeting since she did demit office, Donia Mayor. We are delighted to see her here this evening. And one of the things which the committee decided to do was to make a donation in her honour, as it says on this certificate, for her years of service to the Jewish Historical Society of Israel branch, and a donation has been made to the Music Therapy Centre in Amuna Nevi Landi in memory of Eliad Ohayan. And this is a cause which is very dear to our heart, and glad that she was pleased to accept the honour to be made in our name. So I'm not asking her to come to the front, I'm going to ask her just to meet me halfway. Donia, thank you very much.
I really appreciate it because just before the war started, we were on a tour of Otev Aza, and we went to the Landi home and we were shown around by Eliad, and we were extremely impressed by the young man. And unfortunately he was killed together with his father on the 7th of October in Ofakim. And this really means a lot to me. So thank you very much.
So our speaker this evening has really answered the request that we didn't have enough women speakers in the past. So we're very grateful to Chaya for coming to give this talk about Barney Barnato and his family. I suppose a lot of people who have grown up in the UK will have heard the name Barnato. I think it was a household name at one stage. And I know Les Glassman already mentioned that he was a household name in South Africa. So we are really very keen to hear the story of Barney Barnato from rags to riches, and especially as our speaker has a family connection with the Barnato family. But more of that, and I know that you are, I don't think you've addressed a meeting like this before, so I can assure you that we're all friends here. We're all looking forward, we're all really looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this story. Chaya, the floor is yours. Yes, could people silence their phones, please? And maybe tell me afterwards so I can remember to put mine back on. So between the microphone and the pointer and the slide over, we've landed you with a few bits of insulting.
This one? Yes. Good evening. Thank you for coming. No?
Can
you hear me now? Can you raise the volume?
Yes, it's on now. Right. Try again now.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, thank you for coming. I've already met somebody from South Africa. Is there anybody else? No? Okay. So I suppose one of the most hackneyed expressions in English is to go from rags to riches. Anybody who's come from a poor background or able to said to have gone from rags to riches. But the story you're going to hear tonight is one of rags to riches, as they say nowadays, on steroids. You'll hear about Barney's children, siblings, grandchildren, nephews, nieces. They all led very eventful lives, full of drama, full of action. A lot of what you hear this evening is autobiography of his granddaughter, Diana, Spreading My Wings. More of her later. Barnato was born Barnet Isaacs in the East End of London. I won't burden you with dates because nobody ever remembers dates, but I mention his birth date because there's a mystery surrounding it. Incidents in his life are shrouded in mystery. He claimed to have been born on the same day as Cecil Rhodes, that is the 5th of July, 1853. The only problem is that according to his birth certificate, he was born on the 21st of February, 1851. He was one of several children, some say as many as 16, but I think that's highly unlikely. Born to Leah, née Harris, and Isaac Isaacs, although only 5 of them survived: Harry, Barney, Kate, Lizzie, and Sarah. Isaac was an impoverished dealer in second-hand clothes in Petticoat Lane. The shop had been established by his father, Chaya, whose family had lived in the area for almost 100 years. The lane, as it was known, was in a predominantly Jewish and not very salubrious area known as in the East End, described in Charles Dickens' book, Oliver Twist. In fact, Barney, dressed in clothes from his father's second-hand clothes shop, was remarkably like the Artful Dodger. Leah's family goes back even further in England. In fact, her great-great-grandparents had been living there since the early 1700s. She died at the age of just 37, 2 years after Barney was born, following the birth of his youngest sister, Lizzie. That sounds young, but when you take into account that the life expectancy at that time was in the mid-40s, maybe it wasn't so young. Isaac, his father, on the other hand, lived to the ripe old age, in those days, of 83. Barney was educated at the Jewish free school under the charismatic headmaster, Moses Angel. He and his brother Harry, who was 2 years older, left school at 14. And they went into their father's business. They supplemented their meagre earnings by trading, mostly in apples from a barrel, juggling. They were very good at juggling, and they were also pub door bouncers. It was a hard life, and Barney is reputed to have begged pass-outs from theatre leavers at the Garrick Theatre in Leman Street. Now, in those days, if you bought a ticket to go to the theatre, you could come and go as you pleased, even in the middle of the show. So Barney stood at the door, and as people left, he asked for their tickets, and then he sold them out on for a halfpenny. And he earned quite a good living from all these halfpennies. He was also a talented amateur boxer. In those days, the Marquis of Queensberry rules were rarely applied. The main thing was winning, and he was fearless. He often took on adversaries much bigger than him, and he made quite a lot of money also by bets on himself. While they were still in their teens, the brothers performed on stage in the East End. On one occasion, Barney, who considered himself rather as a straight actor, decided to play the part of Othello, completely unaware of the fact that he was very ill-suited for the role. This is Barney Barnato. Does he look like Othello? No. The sight of the bespectacled, fair-haired, 5'3" Barney portraying the dark-skinned Moor soon had the audience rolling in the aisles. And at the end of the performance, instead of joining the other actors on the stage to take his bow, the mortified Barney stood cowering in the wings. But the delighted audience were mistaken, and the mistaken impression that Barney had been playing for laughs. They kept on shouting, "Barnet too, Barnet too," and that eventually and got him onto the stage to take his bow. Barnet too evolved into Barnato, and eventually the entire family adopted Barnato as their name, their new surname. That's where it came from. Harry, his brother, wanted nothing more than to escape the grinding poverty of the East End. But obviously the life of a street trader, even with the added income from musicals, was never going to make him a rich man. And it was about this time that the diamond rush started in South Africa. He decided to try his luck there. This is his brother Barney, Henry. Harry set sail in 1871 with his cousin David Harris. More about him later. Conditions on the boat, on the ship, were pretty grim, and the voyage took about 3 weeks. However, that didn't deter the thousands of people who emigrated to South Africa during this period. Emigration increased dramatically with the discovery of gold and diamonds. Maybe Harry was one of those who took advantage of the assisted passage scheme. Within a short time, Harry was sending letters home to Barney, describing in glowing terms how the streets were paved with diamonds, and he was living in the life of luxury. Barney decided to join him and managed to save £50, which was no mean feat in those days. That was a lot of money. His brother-in-law, Joel, who was married to Barney's sister Kate and kept the Prince of Prussia pub round the corner, gave him a farewell gift of 40 boxes of bagged cigars. So with the cigars and the grand sum of £50, Barney set sail for South Africa. He arrived at the age of 22 with the clothes that he stood up in, not much more, unable to afford the fare to travel in a covered wagon. He paid £3 to accompany a drover for the 300 miles walk to Kimberley. He kept an eye on the company's cattle, and he slept under the wagon. It took him 3 months to walk all the way to Kimberley. And at Kimberley, what did he find? He found Harry not in a lap of luxury, as he described in his letters, but rather in a shanty town at the end of a long row of tents. There he was, in a torn tent, asleep, in the middle of the day, with holes in his socks. In fact, he wasn't making money from diamonds at all, but rather from performing on stage and doing odd jobs. So much for the streets being paved in gold. It was in Kimberley that the brothers decided to change their name formally from Isaacs to Barnato. Maybe Barnato sounded more exotic, maybe they come across some anti-Semitism. But shortly after arriving in Kimberley, a visiting boxer offered a gold sovereign to anyone who could knock him out. Barney decided to have a go. The idea of the diminutive Barney knocking out the strapping boxer seemed absurd, but Barney wasn't only fighting for the gold sovereign. Again, he accumulated a massive side bets on himself. He entered the ring, took off his glasses, and promptly knocked out his opponent, winning a lot of money, plus, of course, the gold sovereign. He spent his first year learning about diamonds, buying a stone here or there, selling it at a small profit, buying another one. It was a slow process and one that frustrated him. He wanted his own claim. He had a good head for figures, and he was a fast learner and very, very shrewd. Barney was nothing if not enterprising. He still had Joel's farewell gift, so he swapped some of his bad cigars for a chicken, which he then swapped for a goat, which he then swapped for a donkey, and finally for the postman's pony. That was a very good move, always moving upwards. In fact, you could have called him one of the world's first yappies. Barney was no less enterprising than the pony was no less enterprising than Barney. He was familiar with all the diamond diggings and claims, and very soon Barney had learned them from the pony. In those days, diggers believed that diamonds couldn't be found in what was known then as the blue ground, which is quite deep in the Earth's mantle. So as soon as the diggers reached the blue blue ground, they moved on. Barney thought, correctly as it happened, that diamonds could be found in the blue ground too. The brothers scraped up enough money to buy 4 adjacent deserted claims in Kimberley, brought in heavy mining equipment, and were proved right in a very big way. Barney's first large venture was called the Primrose Diamond Mine. I don't know where the name came from, but he subsequently incorporated a primrose into his crest, and both he and Harry had a daughter with the name Primrose as one of their given names. This is a caricature of Barney after he had achieved fame that appeared in Vanity Fair. The brothers amassed a fortune and founded the Kimberley Central Diamond Mining Company. But then Barney became embroiled in a battle with Cecil Rhodes, who worked from the Beers mines. They both wanted to consolidate, competing against each other, who would consolidate first. At first, Barney's offer was higher than Rhodes, but then Rhodes made Barney a very generous offer, on condition that Barney withdrew. It was a very difficult decision for him, but finally Barney accepted. At Rhodes' suggestion, both companies merged, forming the De Beers Consolidated Mines, named after the 2 Dutch brothers on whose land the first diamond had been found. The Barnato brothers' shares were bought out in 1888 for the astronomical sum of £5,338,650, which in today's terms would be in excess of a staggering £2 billion. This is the cheque. In fact, at the time, the cheque was the largest ever to have been issued, and for many years, a framed cheque hung on the wall of Harry's office. In due time, Harry and Barney diversified and doubled their fortune in gold mining shares and set up the new Primrose, of course, gold mining company. Now, in the immortal words of Mrs. Bennet, it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Barney fell in love with a beautiful, dark-haired young lady and aspiring actress by the name of Fanny Christina Bees.
Very Jewish.
She was one of 8 children born to Johannes Petrus Bees and his wife Christiana of Kimberley. Fanny's sister Emily had married the owner of the local hotel, and both sisters helped out in the family business. Now, as their name suggests, they were not Jewish, and Barney's family refused to accept Fanny until she converted. And in those days, it was very difficult to convert in South Africa, and they had to wait 12 years before finally marrying in Johannesburg in 1889. Here they are. Really. Looks like a very society wedding. They had 3 children, Leah, Isaac, known as Jack, and Wolf. As the gold and diamond business expanded, Barney and Harry's nephews, Solly, Jack, and Wolf Joel, sons of Barney's sister Kate and Joel, were recruited to join the family enterprise. Now you've all got the family tree, because it's very confusing. They both had sons called Solly, it's called Jack and Wolf. The Jack and Wolf Barnato and Jack and Wolf Joel. Solly in particular was very ambitious and not too scrupulous. It's claimed that he organised the false indictment of illicit diamond buying by his own brother Jack, and this was a very serious crime. For a black offender, the penalty was death. Whites were flogged and jailed for many years in awful, dreadful conditions. Jack didn't hang around. He scampered back to England, where he ran the English side of the business. This is Barney in the 1890s. To my mind, he looks like Douglas Banks Jr. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Yeah, very distinguished looking gentleman. Perhaps Barney should have paid more attention when at school, when the class studied Pierre Vogt. We read the more possessions, the more worries. And that certainly applies to Barney. The burden of his great wealth and his overwhelming work schedule, coupled with chronic insomnia, played heavily on his mind, and he became increasingly depressed, paranoid, and unfortunately dependent on drink. His behaviour became more and more erratic. He would hand out diamonds to anyone he met, saying, "Do take a few. I've more than I know what to do with them. They make fearful bulges in one's clothes." I can hear you all saying, "I'll buy a lamb." And this is solid. He was famous for his moustache and beard. You can see why. On his doctor's advice, it was decided that Barney should return to England, accompanied by Fanny, their 3 children, his nephew Solly Joel, who acted as his carer. They set sail in early June 1987 on the SS Christiane, presumably named after his mother-in-law. I wonder how many of the gentlemen here, or even the ladies, would name their ship after their mother-in-law. No? His family kept a careful watch on him at all times, but then tragedy struck. Sunday the 13th of June was stormy, and all passengers were forced to stay in their cabins. However, the next day was sunny, and as the ship passed close to Madeira, Barney and Solly went up onto the deck for a breath of fresh air. During their stroll on deck, Barney turned to Solly to ask him the time. Now, in those days, men kept a fob watch in their waistcoat pocket rather than the straps of their wrists. As Solly lowered his eyes for a second to tell Barney the time, it was 2:45, Barney raced to the rails and jumped overboard. Now, according to family legend, as Barney fell, he hit his head on the side of the ship and became lucid and called out, "Anyone who saves me, I will make him a rich man." But it was too late. He drowned. His body was later retrieved and interred at the Wilson Jewish Cemetery. He was dead at 46 years old. He certainly packed a lot into a short life. This is his grave. I don't know if you can see it. This is Barney's grave. Now, when a man drowns, he usually flounders about. His lungs fill with water, and the body sinks. On the other hand, if he's already unconscious when he enters the water, the lungs are still full of air and the body floats. Barney floated, which means he was unconscious when he entered the water. The ship's steward testimony here is interesting. Hearing a shout of murder, he looked up to see Barney and Solly at the ship's side. What happened next is debatable. Solly was hanging on to Barney's coattails, but whether to stop him from going over or to help him over the side is a matter of conjecture. To further muddy the waters, if you'll excuse the pun, the steward, who was the sole witness of what happened on board that day, subsequently became a firm friend of Solly's and went shooting with him on his English estates. Suggestive? Maybe. So was his death caused by his head hitting the side of the boat, or was Solly responsible? Solly, as I said, was certainly ambitious and unscrupulous, and reportedly had designs on his uncle's company. We'll never know, although Solly's own son, Stanhope, was of the opinion that his father had indeed murdered Barney. His family in particular were unconvinced by the suicide theory, claiming it would be out of character for a man who had survived the deprivations of the early days of the diamond rush to take his own life, Barney was now a happily married man with 3 children. He would soon be returning to the land of his birth to be showered with accolades in recognition of literally having gone from rags to riches through his own sheer hard work. In addition, in 1889, he had been elected as member of the Cape Parliament for Kimberley, a position he held until his death. He had everything to look for. Now, in parentheses, he was succeeded as MP by this distinguished-looking gentleman, none other than his cousin David. You remember him? He was the one who had accompanied Harry on his voyage to South Africa in 1871. He was now Colonel Sir David Harris, KCMG, Knight Commander of the Order of St. Michael and St. George. On the way to South Africa, he had met and fallen in love with Rose Gabriel, a young lady from Prussia. They married 2 years later in the first Jewish wedding to be held in Kimberley. Life magazine reported Barney's death in these words: "Gaiety of Nations has been perceptibly overshadowed by the suicide of Barney Barnato. If ever a man had what is commonly called good luck, Barney was that man. He was Fortunatus of the decades, a man with a golden touch. It scandalizes the money-loving world that such a man should have come to such an end." Now, to my mind, the phrase money-loving world sounds vaguely anti-Semitic, but maybe I'm just being too sensitive. After his death, he was depicted on a silver medallion as one of the 24 pioneers of South Africa. There were also some schools named after him. Somebody here went to a school named after him. So he had planned to stay while in the UK, while in England, in the impressive mansion he had built in Park Lane in 1984. And this is it.
Wow.
Yes. It was described as a flamboyant imitation of a French chateau, its roof bristling with gargoyles. There's nothing subtle about Barney. Unfortunately, he died before he could take up residence there, and it was eventually sold to the Jewish aristocrat and politician, Sir Philip Sassoon. After Barney's death, Fanny and her children moved to Brighton. She outlived him by 46 years, finally passing away at the age of 84 at Ascot in Berkshire. She never remarried, and she's buried in the Barnato family plot in the Muslim Jewish Cemetery. In her autobiography, her granddaughter claims that towards the end of Fanny's life, her family were of the opinion that she was being blackmailed, although they never found out why or by whom. Her son, Wolf, gave her a very generous monthly allowance, but she regularly used it all up, even though she did very frugally. All her jewellery had disappeared, except for the 3-strand pearl necklace that she always wore, and a gold chain bracelet with some coins on it, including the gold sovereign that Barney had won in the boxing ring when he first arrived in South Africa. She kept it for all those years. On the other hand, records show that Fanny left almost £100,000, which today would be the equivalent of something in the region of 5 million. Hardly evidence of blackmail. As always with the Barnatos, it's a mystery. For many years, the family tried to discover if there was any truth to the rumour of an argument between Barney and Solly, serious enough for Solly to bump Barney off. They eventually found that Solly had been swindling Barney and his company out of a cool £1 million. That wasn't a huge sum for the two of them even back then, but it was certainly enough to have a row about, especially as it had been made entirely by Barney. Now, Solly was a serial litigant who enjoyed suing people, often over trivialities. He'd feel right at home here. The case duly opened. But on the second day, the matter was settled amicably over lunch. And Solly paid the Barnato family the sum of £1 million. You don't have to worry about Solly, there was still plenty left. With Jack back in England and Barney dead, only Solly's older brother, Wolf, stood between him and inheriting the entire Barnato empire. And Wolf obligingly soon removed himself, or was removed, from the picture. He fell victim to a blackmailer called Karl Kurzer, who went by the name of Baron von Feldheim. His family never discovered the basis for the blackmail attempt, but in any event, Wolf was innocent of whatever it was. In fact, so sure was Wolf of his innocence that he informed the police. Now, that may not have been his first mistake, but it was certainly his last. The police had a brilliant idea: set a trap for Kurzer in Wolf's office and keep catching red-handed. What could go wrong? Unfortunately, things did go wrong. The police hid behind a screen. Kurzer came in and threatened to shoot Wolf if he didn't keep quiet. Wolf jumped up, but before the police could come out from behind the screen, Kurzer had shot him dead. Curtains for Wolf. As always with the Barnato family, there was another version of events. Some say that Wolf was killed because he rejected a proposal from Kurzer either to kill or to kidnap President Kruger. In any event, Kurzer pleaded self-defense. A gun was found in Wolf's top drawer. It was unloaded, but that didn't stop Kurzer from being acquitted, probably due to anti-British or anti-Semitic feelings towards Wolf. The removal from the scene of his brothers Jack and Wolf was extremely convenient for Solly, and considering the huge amount of money involved, that must be the understatement of the century. Now, Solly, despite his lack of scruples, was a generous man and donated to several charities. For those of you from London, he once owned the railway line, which eventually became the Northern Line. He married twice, each time to an actress. The whole family seems to have been partial to actresses and actors. His three passions were the stage, horses, and smart clothes. He died in 1931 and is buried in the family plot, the Wilson Jewish Cemetery. Now, has anyone here dined recently at the Savoy Hotel in London? If you had, you might have noticed the 3-foot wide wood-carved black cat on a shelf in front of a mirror. His name is Casper. And here he is.
Wow.
Yes. And he's known as the poshest cat in London. During his last trip to England, Wolf hosted a dinner party at the Savoy, but due to a last-minute cancellation, there were 13 people seated round the table. Now, Wolf dismissed the superstition that the first person to leave the table would come to an untimely end, and he left the table. When the news of his death reached the Savoy Hotel, the hotel management was shocked and worried that they would lose business. So at the beginning, they arranged for a member of the staff to sit at a table whenever there were 13 people there. The problem was that business meetings were quite often confidential, so eventually Casper was created. Since then, whenever there are 13 guests round the table, Casper joins them. He has a white napkin tied round his neck. He served the same courses with the same cutlery, china and glassware as all the other guests. To this day, many people dine in groups of 13 just in order to enjoy the experience of having Casper dine with them, and it makes a wonderful, wonderful photo, don't you agree? Now, of Barney's 3 children, both Jack and Leah died young. Jack aged 24 from Spanish flu, and Leah aged 40. His younger son, Wolf, was undoubtedly the most colourful. He was born in 1895, and at the time of his father's death was less than 2 years old. He was a financier who made his name as a racing driver. In fact, he was the only driver to win the 24-hour-long race in 3 consecutive years. He was one of the Bentley boys and was even at one time a chairman of Bentley Motors. For some reason, probably because he was the youngest of one of his 3 children, he was known by one and all by the nickname Babe. He was married 3 times in quick succession, had 2 sons and 2 daughters. He died in 1948, aged 53. He wasn't buried in the family plot in Wilston, but in St Jude's United Church, Surrey. His daughter Diana had been married there, and her husband was also buried there. She claims, and I find this incredible, that she was unaware of the existence of the family plot at the Wilston Jewish Cemetery. I say incredible because her grandmother had been buried there a mere 5 years earlier. Now, Wolfe had her 2 daughters. His elder daughter, Virginia, became a reasonable, successful actress. She tried her luck in America and was good enough to land a part in a Hollywood play. Her marriage, of course, to an actor ended in divorce, but it was Diana, his second daughter, more than anyone else, who continued her family's unconventional tradition. 2 years younger than Virginia, she was born in 1918. That's Wolfe's grave in a country churchyard. Wow. These are the 2 girls, Virginia and Diana. Diana came out as a debutante in 1936 at the age of 18. Now, in 1936, the sovereign was King Edward VIII, later the Duke of Windsor. He made no secret of the fact that he found the whole business extremely distasteful and so boring that he was reported to have fallen asleep during the proceedings. Because he had not yet been crowned, in fact he abdicated before the planned coronation could take place. The ceremony took place at a garden party rather than inside Buckingham Palace. Diana practiced a traditional curtsy in front of the mirror, but just as her turn to be presented arrived, there was a sudden cloudburst, and everybody had to be in a hurried retreat into the marquee for tea and ice cream, so she never made her curtsy to the king. What a shame, she looked lovely in that dress. From a very young age, she was fascinated by planes, and at the age of 20 decided to become a pilot and made her first solo flight after a mere 6 hours of instruction. At the outbreak of the Second World War, she volunteered to become a nurse and served in France, later driving an ambulance in London during the Blitz. She became engaged to a squadron leader in the British Air Force just 3 weeks after their first meeting, but 3 days later he died at the controls of his Spitfire. In 1944 she married Wing Commander Derek Walker, but 18 months later, shortly after the end of the war, he was killed during a routine flight. Walker was a very experienced pilot, and Diana was suspicious that it wasn't an accident. She tried for many years to find out what the cause of the crash was, but she never found out. She vowed never to remarry, but later she struck up a very close friendship with an English-based American pilot who, like her father, had been a racing driver. The relationship lasted for 30 years, and in 1947 she gave birth to a son whose given names were Barnato. In 1963 she achieved fame in her own right by becoming the first British woman to break the sound barrier, establishing a world airspeed record for women. For this she was awarded the MBE. In 22, the Royal Mail issued a set of stamps honouring the Spitfire women, as they were called, during the Second World War, including one depicting Diana climbing into the cockpits of her Spitfire. She retired to a mansion in Surrey, where she became a quintessential county lady. For 13 years she was master, or should that be mistress, of the foxhounds, although during the campaign for the abolition of blood sports, she became a much despised figure in the eyes of the abolitionists. This is her in her old age. She's still a very good-looking woman. She died in 2008, aged 90. She never hid her Jewish roots, but she seems to have had little or no connection with the Jewish community. She's buried in St. Jude's Churchyard, also the same church where she married and where her father and husband are buried. Now, Solly's children don't seem to have given their father much nachas either. His favourite daughter, Doris, married someone of whom Solly heartily disapproved. He warned Doris that if she married him, she would be cut off without the proverbial penny. She went ahead, married him, and Solly never spoke to her again. Solly had named his yacht Doris after his favourite daughter. Everything on it, dinner services, cutlery, crockery, furniture, bed linens, everything was inscribed with the name Doris. Following Doris's marriage, and money being no object, he ordered everything to be thrown overboard. It was all replaced and inscribed with the name Eileen after his second daughter. Now, who said that the poor were crazy, the rich just was eccentric? The whole family was deeply involved in horse racing, and in 1925, Eileen became the first woman jockey to win an open race when she won the 4-mile town plate at Newmarket. Solly's son, Dudley, served as a Conservative MP for, very appropriately, the constituency of Dudley, but he was killed in action in World War II. Other Barnato relatives include a moderately successful actor by the name of Alfred Austin, née Abrahams. I mention him because his marriage to an actress, of course, broke up when she ran off with a man called Jack Joel, either Solly's brother or a cousin. It sounds positively incestuous. Now, one for you. I'll take it. This is Sir George Jessel. He wasn't a Barnato, but he was Barney's cousin. He served as Lord of the Rolls, the second most senior judge in England after the Lord Chief Justice in the late 19th century. Also related to him is this television personality, would-be politician, Dame Esther Ransom, who is a great-granddaughter of Sarah Barney's sister and her husband Abraham Isaac Ransom. Unfortunately, she is now very poorly and is one of the leading advocates in the UK for the assisted dying bill. She had if anybody has seen on British television, who do you think you are? She was featured once, and she actually mentioned that her father had inherited quite a lot of money from Barney Barnato, and that had certainly set him up a nice house in Maidvale. So what happened to the Barnato millions? We know that when Harry died in 1908, he left £5 million, a tidy sum in those days, and it's reasonable to assume that Barney left a great deal more. I say this because Barney was definitely the brains in the family, although Harry became recognised as a diamond expert in his own right. A lot of the Barnato fortune was lost in the 1896 gold shares rush. And let's not forget that his family had very expensive hobbies: horse racing, yachts, ships, racing cars, and sadly also gambling. The whole Barnato family comes over as a larger-than-life family, from abject poverty to fabulous wealth, intrigue, multiple marriages, divorces, blackmail, murder, and of course family broadnesses. If you saw a film based on their lives, you'd probably think it was fantasy. It couldn't happen, but it did happen. In fact, there was a film made of his life and appeared on, I think, on British television. I'll end with a quote from a reporter on the day of Barney Barnato's funeral. As the cortege wound its way from the West End to Wilson, it went along miles of streets which were decorated with flags and bunting for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. It could be said of Barney Barnato that he was buried as he had lived, in a right royal fashion.
That was terrific. What a family story. It's truly incredible. I don't know if anybody has anything they'd like to ask about.
You said that you were some relation.
Yeah.
How are you related?
Did you get any of the money? No, it didn't, unfortunately, it didn't trickle down to us. His mother, Leah, and our great-great-great-grandmother, Clara, were sisters. And in fact, our grandmother, actually, whose birthday was yesterday, she was born in 1896, she was just a year old, exactly a year old when Barney died. She told me that she remembers how her grandfather used to say that his grandfather used to talk about rich cousin Barney. So, not within living memory, but yeah, they were very proud of the connection.
Jack?
Was that the Dutch side?
No, the English.
Susan was the same question.
Did you do all this research yourself, or?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
some of it I heard from the family, from my grandmother. It was also good Clara.
Yes, the sums of money really incredible. I had occasion to a sort of will that had been written in 1845, just about the time that Barney was born. Yeah, and a penny in those days is worth £1 at today's prices. So you don't realise just how much inflation there's been in the lifetime of the Barnato family. So £50 multiplied by 100, and the millions you multiply by 100, we're talking really about some very, very substantial sums. Yes. Anybody else got anything? That's what they want to. I should probably ask if anybody else has got a family story that can trump that. We'd like to hear from you.
Chaya, is that building still standing properly?
No. I mean, there is a building there, but it doesn't resemble this at all.
It's a little bit of a shame.
Yes, it is.
Oh.
I've seen the picture and I can't see any gargoyles on it.
Okay. If there are no more questions, where's Mary is over there.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, our chairman has asked me to give the vote of thanks, which I'm delighted to do. I think we've all been entertained, we've all learnt a lot. When I get home, I'm going to try and check something as to whether I have a connection, but it won't be it won't be a family connection. I once looked into who might have been the first Jew in Bushey. I'm not referring to Bushey Underground, I'm referring to Bushey Overground. There was a member of the Jessel family who seemed to have had a country house in Bushey in the early 1900s. So he might have been the first Jew in Bushey. I just had to check which one he was and how close he was to George, and therefore whether he was connected to Barney. Now, having been told about how many members of this family were unscrupulous, I'm not going to say anything about the Dane. However, I am going to say is that obviously we've now learnt that behind every unscrupulous family there is a distant relative who is very honest, and we were delighted to hear that very honest relative this evening.
I should work the committee.
I might say too honest to have received any money from the family sources. So this meeting, I think, will be concluding our meetings for the summer. We had hoped that we would have been able to arrange a date for Florina Hassan to give a talk about the Jews of Gibraltar, and she's asked to postpone it till after the games. So